Hello guys, we are going to be focusing in our learning unit 1 on population growth resources, particularly the Malthusian thought, or the focus is going to be on Malthus, who came up with a particular theory that we're going to be focusing on today. And I think in your notes you were able to capture that and to understand what really this module is all about. Because much as we are really trying to understand the theories themselves, but we're also trying to how do we then capture the principles that are within the theories and apply them to our immediate environment in order for us to not only understand theory and cram theory, but to really have the ability and the capacity to apply the theory, because that's what is important, is for us to be able to start applying or start learning of the skill of applying these theories. So basically this unit explores the fundamental questions of whether population growth can outstrip the resources needed to sustain human life. And this concern is quite central to classical population theory and remains vital or very important in discussing the issue of food security, the issue of environmental sustainability, and as well as the issue of development. And that is why I said earlier that these theories that we're going to be focusing on, beginning from this one that we're starting with in this learning unit, it's going to be how we're going to go about throughout the different learning units that we will be focusing on. So I need you to really be expectant, be observant in your communities, think about what's happening around as we begin to grapple with these issues or grapple with these theories. I want you to also look at what is happening around you. When you're listening to news, what is really being said? Is it capturing, or is it captured in what we're talking about? How can you apply the theory to understand your context? I think that is very, very important. So if we look at population growth and resource limits, you are talking about in population growth, the increase that happens in our communities or in our countries or in our immediate settings, where the number of people grow over time, and the growth is driven by the demographic processes such as fertility, mortality, and migration. And resource limits highlight the finite availability of essential resources. And when I mean finite, I mean the limited availability of essential resources such as the food, the land, the water, and the energy. And somebody might really argue as to are we really having a limitation or a finite availability of things like food, things like land, things like water and energy? And those are good questions to begin to argue with, or to begin to grapple with, to begin to ask yourselves, because you will find as we continue that there are also other issues that maybe some of these theorists maybe did not consider, looking at the socioeconomic issues or socioeconomic factors. As students, you know that part of the reason why we have not yet started classes, it's simply because of the inequalities that are present within the system, where not all the students have socioeconomic means to be able to be at the university. So there's a struggle, with other students not being able to have things like food, for example, things like shelter, things like money for them to be able to register at the university or to have a place to stay, the question would be, is it because they do not have money, or is it because, or rather, is it because there's a finite availability of financial resources, or is it because they find themselves in a position where socio-economically they are being deprived, maybe because of where they're coming from? So these are some of the issues that I want you guys start thinking about and grappling with, and really looking at the situations around you. That is why I said earlier, you must be looking at what is happening around you in order for you to understand these issues. And the relationship between population growth and resources has been considered a potential source of social and economic stress, exactly what I've just said. So if you're thinking about population growth and resources, people are very much worried about, if we have more people, are we not going therefore to have, constraints in terms of the resources that we have? Are we going to have constraints or not constraints? And that those are the questions that I need you to start thinking about. And these are questions that we will start discussing in class. And part of what I want to say to you guys is that I'm going to give you pre-discussions, and I need you to read them. I need you to read the notes and the pre-discussions, because I want the class to be very much interactive. I want you to start thinking. I want you to start observing, and I want you to start then applying what you're learning, and ask questions. And there are no stupid answers to the questions that, or rather, to the questions that you're asking. And let me say this: it's very important for you guys to go through this, pre-discussions, and ask those questions that I'm asking in those, or rather, to answer those questions that I'm asking in the pre-discussions, so that when you come to class, either you're going to contribute with what you were thinking, or you're going to ask questions on the things that you did not understand even from the questions that were asked, so you can be able to ask. I don't want to come to class and have a class that is just quiet, because if that is the case, I'm just gonna go through the slides and go, but it won't add value into your learning. So I'm challenging you this year not to be afraid to speak, but to start thinking when you're at home and you're reading, and to start thinking about these things. And when we come to class, we'll start engaging on these issues. So when we're thinking about the issue of population growth, as I said, people are increasing over time, and that is because of fertility. There are people who are born, sometimes people are dying, and sometimes there's migration. Either people are coming in or going out of a particular place. And when it comes to resource limits, as I mentioned, we're talking about the limited availability of important resources like food, like land, like water, and like energy. Now comes in Thomas Malthus and the Malthusian theory. Now, Thomas Malthus was an English economist, and who introduced this theory in an essay on the principles of population in the 18th century. He argued that population growth tends to increase faster than food production, and this will lead to serious shortages of resources unless this issue of population growth is controlled. And he had these tenets that, number one, and I need you to really know these things, guys, what they are all about. Malthus is saying there's a problem with population growth. Okay, and what is the problem? The problem is that there's a geometric population growth. Population increase exponentially. All right, it increases from 2, 4, 6, 8. Like it is exponential, versus the food production that is growing very, very slowly and in linear fashion. Like the example that I made here, there's no multiplication. Food just grows steadily, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like if you have to speak about the linear approach or linear fashion of food growth, so it means that much as people are growing faster, we need to be aware that food is not growing linearly, or it's not growing that exponentially, but linearly, very slowly. That is what Malthus said in his theory in 1798. So Malthus predicted that there would be this imbalance, and that this imbalance, or rather, he predicted that this imbalance would result in things like poverty, famine, disease, and social instability. That if we're going to have more people growing, then we're causing poverty. If we're going to have people having more babies, we're causing famine, we're causing diseases, and we're causing social instability. And the question is it true? And we will argue on this as we move on. And so Malthus says, okay, we have a problem. The problem is population growth. So what is the problem of population growth? Is that food grows, arithmetically, but the population is growing geometrically. And so for us to be able, therefore, to control this population growth, to control this population so that we have resources, we need to have a solution. And he says the solution to this is what he calls checks. Okay? And he identified two types of checks that will regulate the population size in relation to the resources. And the first positive, or rather, first type of check, he calls it positive checks. And I'm not sure what is positive about that, but anyway, that's what he called them. He said these are factors that will increase mortality and reduce population size after growth exceeds resources. So this will actually lead to sufferings, or rather, these levels of increased mortality that reduce population size, they will lead to suffering, or often lead to suffering. And he says these positive checks that will increase mortality and reduce population size are famine, disease, war, natural disasters. So according to Malthus, it is important that there's famine so that people die, and then as people die, therefore the population size is not going to exceed the resources. Diseases are necessary because they reduce population growth. Wars are necessary because they reduce population growth. Natural disasters, like the ones that we've been having in Tata, they're necessary because they reduce population growth. That is the positive checks by Malthus, how to deal with population growth. And the question is, was he correct? And I'm wondering, as you're listening to this, are you really getting irritated by what Malthus is saying? And if that is the case, that is good, that you are starting to think and you're starting to associate what Malthus is saying, or what he said, and to the reality that we're living in. That is it because are these famines, are these we've been having an issue of drought in the Eastern Cape. There's an issue of water in the Eastern Cape. Is it because is it necessary for us to have those droughts so that people can die, so that there's more resources? Or are there resources in South Africa like food, but the problem is that the socio-economic conditions do not really afford other people an opportunity to be able to have access to those resources? That's the question. And as you are going through what Malthus is saying, I want us to be very critical in our thinking and really question if what Malthus is saying is true or not. And I think it's important for you to think that way, because I think there's an assignment that you're going to be writing where you're going to have to be critical in your thinking, and I will guide you through that critical analysis. But I need us to start engaging, because you'll realize as we start talking, as we start engaging, as we start asking questions, as you start answering questions and asking questions when you come to class, or coming up with what you were thinking, you will realize that you are preparing yourself, and you realize that you're beginning to grow in your way of thinking. Your mind is really becoming enlarged. You're starting to think differently, to think critically. So that's what I'm hoping that this will happen as we begin to go through these different theories. So the positive checks are those that will kind of cause increased mortality, to reduce population. But he also called, talked about another type of check, which is a preventive check or preventive checks. These will reduce population growth by reducing, how much people are giving birth or lowering fertility before resources shortage occurs. And these are considered less destructive than the ones that we just talked about that often lead to suffering. So he talked about number one, the issue of delayed marriage, that people should delay their marriage, should delay marriage because once they have marriage or once they're married, they will have babies, and when they have babies, and if they are not working, it's going to be a problem because it leads to poverty. It leads to people not having resources, and therefore, it's a continuous struggle for resources because there's more people that are being born into the system. And he talked about moral restraint or sexual abstinence, that people should have moral restraint, should not engage in sex. They should control themselves. So this would be the modern interpretation of contraceptions, of family planning, and women's education. And you will actually see this is not what he spoke about, contraception or family planning or women's education. This was spoken about by the Neo-Malthusians, these guys that we are now talking about in this slide. So the Neo-Malthusians, they emerged in the 19th century and 20th century. They adopted the concerns that Malthus had. And they were looking at modern context, and they just adopted what he was talking about. And they started thinking about, people should have voluntary fertility control, and there must be population policies. So women should, or men and women should really start controlling their fertility. But at the same time, there must be population policies that are going to control the whole issue of population growth. Okay, so if you think about voluntary fertility control, this is advocacy for individual choice in family size. So you need to choose the family size that you're going to have. The contraceptive use issue is that there must be a promotion of modern birth control methods. So the different types of modern birth control methods. So these are the things that people started talking about in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And these are the things that, if you think about it, we have now people really are voluntarily deciding, the number of children that they're going to have. And people are now making a decision, to use birth control, at different contraceptives. So there is, high usage of contraceptives, even though in South Africa, it's though it's high, yet it's not in the numbers that are being desired by the government in particular, especially for the younger population, where there's really high fertility rates, particularly among the teenagers. So if you think about what Malthus, the conversation that he started at the time, you realize that this conversation really had an impact in society. And the Neo-Malthusians who came, they started talking about these issues of voluntary fertility control and contraceptive use, which has impacted our community up to this point. So it's the 21st century right now. It's many, many, many years ago that when this were deliberated on, they were discussed, argued on, debated upon, and these are some of the things that are now being used, and how it has had an impact in our society. His foundations of his essay that really allowed the conversation around issues of population, which was not there prior. Malthus, writing that population essay. So issues of population policies. There's been a lot of policies. Globally, governments initiate policies to manage population growth. We have a population policy in this country, that 1998 policy, and I think it was revisited in 2015. So we have that policy, and so it means that the Neo-Malthusian's perspective, that related to the issue of fertility control and population policies, have had a very powerful impact on a number of governments and countries and nations, and those have actually been implemented. So the neo Malthusians, they are linking high fertility to poverty, to environmental degradation and food insecurity, influencing global population and control programs. Yet still, they are still saying that this issue of high fertility, it's leading to poverty, it's leading to environmental degradation, is leading to food insecurity. It's influencing global population control programs. The question is it true? Is it true though? I would agree on the issues of voluntary fertility control, where people have got an agency. People have a choice in terms of how large their families are going to be, or how many children they're going to have, or they decide that they will use contraceptives. And those population policies are very much important to manage not only population growth, but to also manage the issues that are related to population growth, that are related to populations and humanity. What about the development of humanity? What about the empowerment of those people? And I think this is what our South African policy on population is really focusing on, where it's not just talking about we want to reduce the number of people or children that are born. It's not just focusing on that. It is mostly focusing how do we reduce fertility among those who are young, so that them having children does not disadvantage them and perpetuate poverty in their lives. So it's about empowering the younger ones. It's about empowering the young people and saying we need to educate our young people, particularly our young women. We need to educate them. They need to go to school, because studies have shown that once you educate women, once you educate and give them education opportunities, you reduce fertility, and you also you have a position as a country where you have manageable fertility rates. Okay, so the policy has got to think about these things that we related to earlier, issues of socioeconomic realities that people are living in, because it's not necessarily that high fertility it leads to poverty, or that high fertility it's leading to food insecurity. Is not the case. Socioeconomic factors, there are determinants that we need to think about outside of just population growth. We need to think about other things. And I think that's something that I need you guys to start to really think about, that it's not just one thing, population growth, that is leading to in food insecurities and depletion of resources. It's a whole lot of things. Because the truth of the matter is that as we will continue on this lesson unit, you will see that there's a problem, and I think it's in this slide, on the issue of food security and population pressure. Okay, so when we're talking about food security, for example, it means that all people have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. Population growth can strain food systems by increasing demand for agricultural land, water, and production. Okay, so it can strain the systems, food systems, population growth. Okay, there's a possibility for that. However, we need to also think about, is it really a problem that the population growth is causing a strain on food systems, or is it because there are people who are not having access to the food systems, right? So when we're thinking about food security, we're thinking about the availability. Is there enough food produced and supplied? Number two, that we need to really think about, it's the utilization. Okay, safe, nutritious use of food for good health. But another thing that we need to think about is access. Do all people have access to it? Do all people have access to economic and physical ability to obtain food? That is where the question is. And once you're thinking about access, then you're not just talking about the population growth, as a problem, but you're talking about access to economic means that empower a person or individuals or a community to have access to economic and physical ability to obtain food, that they will have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. And in South Africa, national food sufficiency contrasts with household level. So there's a lot of food in this country, but it contrasts. There is this contrast. There is this dichotomy. There is this, imbalance that is continuing in this country, and is based on household level, socioeconomic positioning, where there's levels of poverty, higher poverty, that there's inequality, and there's high levels of unemployment. So now in one family you will have people that are working, they can have availability of food, they can have access to food, and they can have nutritious food, they can utilize food, or they have utilization of safe nutritious use of food for health. But in other communities they just eat to survive, and there's a problem in terms of the type of food they eat. The nutritious kind of food is not there, so people therefore may be susceptible to sicknesses and diseases that may lead them to mortality. So the question is, according to Malthus, he says when people get sick and they die, that's good, but is it human to think that you need to have those kinds of checks to eliminate human beings? Because we find out that the problem is not necessarily the growth of population. The problem is other things, determinants, that are leading people not to have access into the resources. So it's not like the population growth is causing lack of resources. No, there are intermediary issues that we need to deal with, like economic and physical ability to obtain the food. Okay, so we have approximately about 20% of households experience moderate to severe food insecurity in South Africa, and this is more so in rural areas like the Eastern Cape, where there is a moderate to severe food insecurity. Okay, so what happens when there's the disasters like what happened in Tata, in June last year? What happens when those disasters, and also considering that those people might not even have had jobs, to take care of themselves, and they lose their livelihood, they lose their houses, they lose, they lose everything that they have. I remember last year, I was part of the people in the group that was really assisting, the people in Tata, and we're bringing them food, we're bringing them clothes, and you go into the places that they were in. They would be in halls. Now you have everybody stuck in one place. You have parents, you have adults and children just stuck in one place, and you look at that, your heart will become so sore that you're looking at individuals, you're looking at people, you're looking at human beings who are subjected to those horrible conditions, and there seems to be no help coming their way, and they seem not to be even having any type of alternative by themselves, because economically they are not in a position to take care of themselves, to take out of that to be out of that situation. So, and that is why you find that even today, you had these strikes where the people of Mtata said the government did not care, the municipality did not care, they never came to our rescue, all right, because the people felt like we did not have any option. We were left stuck on our own, and these are mostly the poor of the poorest, right? Or the poorest of the poor, who did not have any socio-economic muscle or socio-economic enablement help them to make choices that should those kinds of things happen, they can be able to have options, and they can be able to take care of themselves. They've got insurances and all of that. They do not. And so it's not just about population growth. And the reality is that these are the things that are happening in our communities. And so when we're looking at these theories, we need to be looking at them with that critical eye, looking at what is happening around us. And I want us to look at the environmental constraints and population growth as we're about to go to the end of our of our session. When we're talking about environmental constraints such as water scarcity, land degradation, climate change, and biodiversity loss, you know, these are intensified by population growth, especially where livelihoods depend on natural resources. This is what is being said, that the constraints such as water scarcity, land degradation, climate change, and biodiversity are because of rapid population growth. It could be true, but it could not also not be true. That population growth does not necessarily cause land degradation or water scarcity. Maybe, of course, if the infrastructure is not being taken care of, not being kind of increased to meet up with the population growth, it could be that therefore there will be a problem with water scarcity or electricity or whatever. And it's not a problem, it's not that people are growing that is a problem. It could be because the government is not planning for those things. The government is not planning for more people that are coming into the system, more people are being born. They're not planning. If you see or look at our clinics, look at our roads, when our government came into power, they never planned for these things. They never had, they never, I'm looking for the right word, they were never able to think about or project, yeah, that's the right word I'm looking for, to project population growth. And unfortunately, in a government, you don't have people who are demographers who would therefore project what is going to happen or estimate population growth and help the government to be able to kind of plan for the ultimate population growth. So it's not necessarily the population growth that's a problem. Now you have a problem of even management, you have a problem of poor planning, poor management, poor vision, poor strategic thinking. So those are things that we need to think about. So if you think about water scarcity, so this is limited access to fresh water for consumption in agriculture. I mean, if you look at rural communities, there was a time that they did not have taps, but now the government has tried to do that, but it's not everybody who has those kinds of resources, and that is not because of population growth. It is because we come from a history that oppressed black people, or that oppressed a particular race and favored another race. So now you still have these imbalances of the past still continuing. You have a people that were left on their own in rural areas, and they were not part of the urban communities. In places like Mthatha, for example, Mthatha was not part of South Africa; it was a homeland. All right, so you had to have even a pass, all right, to come to this place. Even going to from Tata, which was Transkei, going to Ciskei in East London, you had a border. So our people were kind of divided, and that was done strategically. Now, when you have a people that have been secluded from the rest of the nation, of course, there will be issues of development. So that is why you find areas like in the Eastern Cape, there's less development than in other areas, and people are moving out. They're migrating to areas that are more developed, more opportunities that they can be able, to have and to get. Particularly when it comes to employment, people are going to those places. Now, it's not population growth, but it's a problem of a lot of things that happened in the past. that we also have to consider. So you can't therefore have a blanket approach to these theories by Malthus and the neo Malthusians that will have a blanketed approach to the situations and the conditions that people are going through. Okay, so things like land degradation. So there might be a reduction in productive capacity of land due to human activities, and maybe we're not taking care of the land. Maybe we take we kind of taking out trees and all of that, and which are very much important for our ecosystem. If we have have no responsibility in taking care of our land, then we're not ensuring that the land is good and we can be able to maybe plant for the benefit of having food resources. And when we're not taking care of the land, it's going to be degraded anyway. But it's not because of population growth, I still argue. Okay, so you have issues of climate change, where there are long-term shifts in global weather patterns affecting the ecosystem. The question is it because of the growth in in human beings, or is it because of companies that maybe having we have companies that may be generating maybe even products that may be harming the land and causing climate change? Could it be the issue? But is it population growth? My point, guys, is that we cannot, and it should not just be, you know, population growth is what is causing all of these things. Okay, loss of biodiversity, is it caused by population growth? And I need you to think about all of these questions. And some may argue for or against, what I'm saying. But it's good because I want us to have that kind of a discussion and openness. And when we meet on Wednesday, we're going to have a strong discussion. So I'm recording this because I need you to listen to the recording. I need you to write notes, and I need you to engage with it. On Wednesday, I need you to come with questions in class. Come with questions in class, and let's engage. I'm expecting that everybody will be in class and we can be able to discuss this. So in this point, maybe let me just close it by saying that environmental impacts are also shaped by consumption patterns, by technology, by economic systems, complicating simple Malthusian explanations, exactly what I've been saying. So the Malthus explanations are quite simple, but there's a lot of things that are involved. Consumption patterns, the technology issue, the economic systems, it could be the political systems, inequalities that are there in the system. It could be corruption in South Africa also. So it's complicating the whole explanation by Malthus. So people have criticized Malthus. The critics of Malthus are saying that Malthusian theory, is having flaws, particularly regarding its applicability in developing countries. And I've been talking about this already. Malthus has not really thought about this thing or thought it through. Critics argue that Malthus underestimated technological innovation, such as improved seeds, irrigation, and fertilizers, which have dramatically increased food production. So there's been a food increased production because of technology. All right. So the food technology, or rather the agricultural technology, responded to the population growth. So when there's population growth and you see that people are there or they are being born, you need to think about, okay, how do we take care of those people, and not say we need to have checks and like famines and like wars and let's just kill these people. You need to be thinking about innovation. And also many scholars have contended that hunger and poverty stem from unequal resource access, poor governments, and economic inequality, rather than just population growth. Exactly what I've been saying. This is not just about population growth. There are a lot of issues: resource access, poor governance, economic inequality, etc., etc. In South Africa, the declining fertility rates and moderated population growth coexist. So we have a declining fertility and we have a moderate population growth. Okay, but it is persistent with poverty and food insecurity, especially in the Eastern Cape. So it's not like that there's a high levels of fertility rates in South Africa that are causing all of these issues with food insecurity. It's not that. It's that we have a reduced or a declining fertility rate. We had a just stable population growth. But the problem is that when people are poor, they are not able to access food and they therefore do not have food security, and especially in rural areas like the Eastern Cape. So this suggests structural economic factors, they are more central than the population growth or population size. So the relevance of Malthus' theory today, while Malthus' specific predictions have not fully materialized, however, his work remains important as a starting point for understanding the debates that have been given to you guys. I've been kind of throwing debates around. So issues of the sustainability debates, informing discussion on the long-term resource management. All right, so we need to have resource management, population environment interaction. We need to analyze how human beings, human populations affect the ecosystem around them. We need to be able to take care of the environment that we live in. Food security and resource use. We need to, frame the challenges in global food supply and resource allocation. Okay, so it kind of helps us to frame the challenges that we have in global food supply, and what are those challenges that are causing the food supply or the shortage thereof. What about the resource allocation? Do we have equal resource allocation that causes people to have equality across the board? So the Malthus, theory kind of allows us to have these different debates that we can be able to engage in. So modern population theory treats Malthusian ideas as foundational, but not a complete explanation for difficult demographic and environmental challenges. So to summarize this learning unit, we covered the intricate, difficult relationship between population growth and resources. We explored the foundational Malthusian theory and its modern interpretations, which is the most important thing, and the core ideas of Malthusian population theory, including the geometric population growth versus arithmetic food production, how to deal with population growth. He said we need to have positive checks like famines, disease, and wars, and preventive checks like moral restraints and delayed marriage, not necessarily contraception. Contraception comes from the Malthusians. So the Neo-Malthusians, they have a different perspective, where they're thinking about development and population policies, and they're thinking that people should be able to have agency to decide how many children they're going to have or the size of the families that they're going to have. So the critics of Malthusian thinking, they regard technological change and the role of inequality in food insecurity. So he did not think about the technological advancement that will allow us to have increased food supply or food resources. So the relevance of this debate to South Africa and Eastern Cape highlight the structural economic factors over just simple population pressure or simple population growth. So that is the end of lesson unit 1, and I'm hoping that you will be able to